The salt-stained auction notice flapped against the community bulletin board outside Harborview Marina, held in place by a single rusty thumbtack that had seen better decades. Most people walked past it without a second glance. Most people had learned long ago that maritime auctions meant trouble, meant money pits disguised as opportunities, meant sleepless nights and empty bank accounts. But Rosa Delgado stopped. She stopped because she had exactly $847 in her checking account. 2 children who deserved better than the mold-infested apartment they were living in, and a desperation so profound it had started to feel like courage. The notice read, USCG Maritime Asset Auction, November 14th, 10 a.m. Various vessels and maritime equipment. All sales final. Sold as is, where is. Buyer responsible for removal and all associated costs. Rosa pulled out her phone and searched for more details. The auction listing appeared on her cracked screen, a parade of maritime disasters waiting for foolish buyers. Damaged fishing boats, rusted buoys, salvaged equipment from defunct operations. She scrolled through the photos with a sinking feeling that matched the vessels themselves. Then she saw it. Lot 27. Archaeological Research Vessel MERIDIAN EXPLORER. 87-foot steel-hulled ship. Partially submerged at Dock 12, Southport Marina. Built 1962. Last operated 1987. Seized for unpaid marina fees, abandonment. Structural integrity compromised. Not seaworthy. Salvage only. Minimum bid, $500. Rosa zoomed in on the single photograph. The ship sat low in the water, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin, rust bleeding down its hull in orange tears. One side listed noticeably, suggesting water in the hold. The wheelhouse windows were broken, the deck covered in bird droppings and debris. A faded university logo was barely visible on the bow, but it was 87 feet long. It had space, and the minimum bid was only $500. She clicked through to the vessel's history. The MERIDIAN Explorer had been built as a research vessel for oceanographic studies, operated by the University of Maritime Sciences until 1987 when funding dried up. It had been used for archaeological surveys, underwater excavations, academic expeditions. Then it was abandoned at Southport Marina, where it sat for 36 years accruing fees, slowly sinking, slowly dying. The marina had finally seized it and was selling it just to clear the dock space. Rosa looked at the photo again. She wasn't looking at a ship. She was looking at possibility wrapped in rust and neglect. If she could somehow get it for close to the minimum bid, if she could figure out how to pump the water out, if she could make even part of it habitable, maybe, just maybe, her children could have rooms with portholes instead of walls that grew mold in the corners. It was insane. Completely insane. She saved the listing and kept walking toward her second job, the evening shift at the harbor master's office where she answered phones and filed paperwork for $14.50 an hour. Her first job, morning shift at the fish processing plant, paid $13.75. Between the 2 jobs and the weekend gig cleaning vacation rentals, she worked about 70 hours a week and still couldn't afford a security deposit on a decent apartment. Rosa was 34 years old, divorced for 5 years, and so tired she sometimes forgot what it felt like to not be exhausted. Her ex-husband, Carlos, had disappeared to Texas 3 years ago, his child support payments as reliable as a lottery ticket. Her daughter Sophia was 11, brilliant and angry at the world for being poor. Her son Miguel was 8, still sweet enough to hug her in public, still young enough to believe things would get better. She'd been saving every possible dollar for 6 months, trying to get enough for first and last month's rent somewhere decent. The $847 represented sacrifice on a level most people couldn't understand. No new clothes, no eating out, no Christmas presents, no small joys. Just the grinding accumulation of dollars that never seemed to add up to enough. But $500 for a ship, even a sinking one, even one that needed everything, meant she'd still have $347 left over. Meant she'd own something outright. No landlord, no rent increases, no eviction notices. She reached the harbor master's office and clocked in, her mind already working through impossible mathematics. The ship would need pumps to get the water out, would need repairs to make it livable, would need utilities somehow, would need. But it would be hers. That evening, after her shift ended at 9 p.m., Rosa drove her 2003 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on for 2 years to Southport Marina. She had to see the ship in person, had to know if this wild idea had even a shred of feasibility. Southport Marina was the ugly cousin of the tourist marinas downtown. No fancy restaurants, no charter fishing operations catering to wealthy day trippers. Just working boats, repair shops, and a collection of vessels in various states of decline. She found Dock 12 easily. The MERIDIAN EXPLORER was impossible to miss, listing at about a 15-degree angle, its port side visibly lower in the water than starboard. Rosa walked along the dock, her footsteps echoing on the weathered planks. Up close, the ship looked even worse. The hull showed decades of neglect. The deck was covered in grime, and water lapped at a level that suggested at least partial flooding below. But the bones looked solid. The hull was steel, not fiberglass. The design was sturdy, built for open ocean research, not recreational cruising. And there was so much space. An 87-foot ship had more square footage than most houses. You're wasting your time. Rosa turned to find an older man standing at the edge of the dock, weathered face skeptical beneath a faded cap. He wore coveralls stained with oil and carried a toolbox that had seen decades of use. "Excuse me," Rosa said. "That ship." He nodded toward the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. "You're looking at it like you're thinking about bidding. Save yourself the trouble. Thing's a death trap. Been taking on water for years. The bilge pumps failed ages ago. Probably 3-4 feet of water in the hull by now. Engines seized. Electrical systems shot. Hull's probably got holes I could stick my fist through." Rosa felt her brief hope deflating. "How do you know?" "Been working this marina for 30 years. Watched that ship go from research vessel to wreck in slow motion. The university abandoned it in '87 when their funding got cut. Marina tried to find buyers for years. Nobody wants it. Costs more to fix than it's worth. What if someone just wanted to live on it?" Rosa asked quietly. "Not take it out to sea, just live aboard?" The man studied her more carefully, his expression softening slightly. "You got kids?" "2. He shook his head. "Ma'am, I don't know your situation, but living aboard that thing would be harder than any apartment, no matter how bad. You need to pump it out daily, patch the leaks, figure out power, water, sewage. And that's before winter hits. These steel hulls get cold as a meat locker when the temperature drops. How much would it cost to pump it out? Just to see what's down there?" The man scratched his jaw. "Couple $100 to rent a decent pump for a few days. But here's the thing, you pump it out, water's just going to come back in through whatever holes are letting it in now. You need to be patching while you're pumping. Need diving gear or a hull inspection. Need materials, welding equipment if the holes are in the steel. You're looking at thousands before you even make it livable." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Of course it was impossible. Everything was impossible. That was the defining feature of her life. Impossible situations that somehow had to be possible because she had 2 children counting on her. "Thank you for the information," she said quietly, turning to leave. "Wait." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Name's Frank Pierce. I do marine repairs, hull work, welding. If you're serious about this, if you actually bid on that wreck and somehow get it, call me. I'll at least help you figure out if it's salvageable before you throw good money after bad." Rosa took the card. "Why would you help me?" Frank shrugged. "Because 30 years ago, I was broke with a family and took a chance on a boat everybody said was junk. Fixed it up, lived aboard for 5 years while I got my business going. Sometimes crazy works out. Usually it doesn't, but sometimes it does." That night, Rosa sat at the tiny kitchen table in their apartment, while Sophia and Miguel slept in the bedroom they shared. The apartment was a studio she'd converted with curtains and creativity, giving the kids the only actual bedroom, while she slept on a futon in the living area. The walls had black mold creeping along the corners that the landlord refused to fix. The heating worked intermittently. The neighborhood had enough crime that Rosa walked the kids to in from school every day, even though it made her late for work. Rent was $1,100 a month for 450 square feet of substandard housing. She opened her laptop and researched everything she could find about the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. Academic papers from the 1970s and 80s mentioned it in footnotes. Photographs from university archives showed it in its prime, white and gleaming, loaded with research equipment, surrounded by excited graduate students. One article from 1982 detailed an archaeological survey the ship had conducted off the coast, searching for shipwrecks from the colonial era. The research team had used early sonar equipment, underwater cameras, diving operations. They discovered several significant wreck sites that had later been properly excavated. Rosa found the ship's original specifications: 87 feet in length, 20-foot beam, steel hull, twin diesel engines, crew quarters for 8, laboratory space, equipment storage, multiple decks. It had been built to withstand ocean conditions, to operate for weeks at a time, far from port. If even half of that structure was still intact, it was more space than her children had ever had. She found Frank Pierce's card and studied it. Pierce Marine Services. Reasonable rates, honest work. Then she opened her banking app and looked at that number. $847. Almost a year of sacrificing everything just to accumulate $847. Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, why are you still awake?" Rosa closed the laptop quickly. "Just paying some bills, Mija. Go back to bed." Sophia didn't move. At 11, she was too perceptive, too aware of their situation. "Are we going to have to move again? Why would you think that? I heard you talking to Miss Chin next door. About the mold. About how the landlord won't fix anything." Rosa's heart broke a little more. Her daughter shouldn't have to worry about these things. "We're going to be fine, Sophia. I'm working on something that might be better for us." "Better how?" Rosa hesitated. She shouldn't say anything. Shouldn't get Sophia's hopes up about something as crazy as buying a sunken research ship. But she was so tired of having nothing to offer her children except promises that things would eventually improve. "I'm looking at a place we might be able to afford. It needs work, a lot of work, but it would be ours. No landlord, no rent increases." Sophia's eyes widened. "Like a real house?" "Like a boat," Rosa admitted. "A big one. Big enough for all of us." "A boat? Mom, that's actually cool." Rosa smiled despite herself. "It's also crazy. It might not work out. So don't get excited yet." "Is it expensive?" "It's cheap because it needs fixing." Sophia moved closer, sitting on the edge of the futon. "Can I see it?" Rosa opened the laptop again and pulled up the photo of the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. Sophia stared at the listing ship, the peeling paint, the obvious decay. "That looks like it's sinking," she said slowly. "It is a little bit." "Mom, that looks like it's sinking a lot." "I know, but underneath all that rust and water, it's still a strong ship. It used to do important research. It used to explore the ocean. And if we could fix it up, even just part of it, we could live there. You could have your own room. Miguel could have his own room. There'd be portholes instead of these moldy walls." Sophia studied the photo for a long moment. Then she said, "How much does it cost?" $500 minimum bid. Maybe more if other people want it. That's all our savings." "I know. What if it doesn't work? What if we buy it and can't fix it?" Rosa had asked herself the same question 100 times since seeing the auction listing. "Then we'll have made a mistake." "But Sophia, I've been playing it safe your whole life. I've been working 3 jobs, following all the rules, trying to do everything right. And we're still living in a place with mold on the walls where I'm scared to let you play outside. Maybe it's time to take a risk." Sophia looked at her mother, really looked at her, seeing the exhaustion and determination and desperate hope. "If you think we should do it, then we should do it. You don't think I'm crazy? I think you're brave, Mom. I think we're all brave. And I think living on a boat, even a broken one, will be better than this." They sat together in the quiet apartment, mother and daughter, looking at a photograph of a sinking ship and seeing possibility instead of disaster. It was the kind of moment that changes everything, when desperation and courage blur together into something that might be called faith. The auction was scheduled for November 14th, 6 days away. Rosa had 6 days to decide if she was going to take the biggest risk of her life or keep playing it safe in a moldy apartment that was slowly poisoning her children. She thought about Carlos, about how he'd always played it safe, always made the sensible choice, right up until the moment he'd chosen to abandon his family because responsibility was too hard. She thought about her own parents, immigrants who'd risked everything to come to America, who'd worked impossible hours to give their children possibilities they'd never had themselves. She thought about Sophia's words, "I think you're brave, Mom." Maybe she could be. Maybe she had to be. Rosa opened a new document on her laptop and started making lists. What she'd need if she won the bid, who she'd need to call, how she'd organize the logistics of pumping out a partially sunken ship and somehow turning it into a home. The lists were long. The obstacles were enormous. The chances of success felt microscopic. But the minimum bid was only $500, and she had $847, and sometimes crazy works out. The morning of November 14th arrived cold and gray, the kind of late autumn day when the sky and ocean blur into a single sheet of slate. Rosa had requested the morning off from the fish processing plant, lying and saying she had a doctor's appointment. Her supervisor had been skeptical, but approved it. She'd arranged for her neighbor, Miss Chun, to watch Miguel and Sophia until she got back. The kids knew what she was doing, and Miguel had hugged her that morning with an intensity that made her eyes water. "Get us the boat, Mom," he'd whispered. "Get us the Explorer ship." Rosa arrived at the maritime auction at 9:45 a.m. The venue was a converted warehouse near the commercial docks, cold and echoing, smelling of diesel and seawater. Maybe 40 people had gathered, most of them men in work clothes, commercial fishermen or salvage operators looking for equipment or parts. She signed into the registration desk, received bidder number 73, and found a folding chair near the back. Her hands shook as she held the number card. In her purse was a cashier's check for $750, the maximum she'd allowed herself to bid. If the MERIDIAN EXPLORER went for more than that, she'd walk away. She'd have to walk away. The auctioneer was a barrel-chested man named Grimm who looked like he'd spent his life around boats and had the weathered skin to prove it. He started promptly at 10 a.m., moving through the lots with efficiency. Fishing nets went for $200. A collection of marine electronics sold for $450. A damaged tender boat went for $175. The bidding was practical, businesslike, men buying tools for their trade with the dispassion of people who knew exactly what things were worth. Rosa watched and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs with increasing force. Lot 27 was coming up. She could see it on the large screen behind the auctioneer. The photo of the MERIDIAN EXPLORER in all its decrepit glory. "All right, folks," Grimm announced, "Lot 27. Now, this is a special one. The MERIDIAN EXPLORER, 87-foot research vessel, steel hull, currently taking on water at Southport Marina, Dock 12. This beauty was built in 1962, operated by the university until 87. Been sitting ever since. Buyer responsible for all removal costs, all repairs, all debts associated with the vessel. Marina fees alone are about $1,800, and those transfer to the new owner." Rosa's stomach dropped. $1,800 in marina fees? That wasn't in the auction listing. That meant even if she won the ship for $500, she'd owe almost $2,000 total. She only had $847 in the world. Minimum bid is $500, Grimm continued. "And let me be clear, this ship is sold as is for salvage only. Coast Guard won't certify it for operation. You're buying scrap metal that happens to be shaped like a boat. Do I hear $500? Silence filled the warehouse. Rosa looked around. Nobody was raising their bidder cards. Nobody wanted it. "Come on, folks," Grimm said. 87 feet of steel. That's worth more than $500 in scrap alone if you cut it up. Still silence. A man in the third row laughed. "Costs more to cut it up and haul it away than you'd get for the scrap. That thing's a money pit." Another voice called out. "Marina should pay someone to take it." Grimm's expression showed he'd expected this. "Okay, I'm authorized to reduce the minimum. Let's try $250. Do I hear $250. More silence. Rosa felt a strange mix of hope and dread. If nobody bid, maybe the marina would let it go for almost nothing. But the marina fees still lurked, that $1,800 she couldn't afford. $250, Grimm repeated. It's a research vessel, people. Historic interest. Academic use. Somebody give me $250. Rosa's hand started to rise. Then a voice from the front stopped her. $100. Everyone turned to look. An older man in an expensive jacket had raised his bidder card. Rosa recognized the type immediately. A wealthy hobbyist, someone who collected interesting junk for fun, who had money to burn on projects that went nowhere. Grimm pointed at him. About $100 from bidder 14. Do I hear $150? Rosa's hand shot up before she could stop herself. $200. Heads turned to look at her. She felt dozens of eyes assessing, judging, wondering what she could possibly want with a sunken research vessel. The man in the expensive jacket glanced back at her, then raised his card again. $300. Rosa's mind raced. $300 plus $1,800 in fees meant $2,100 total. She literally could not afford it. But if she didn't bid, she'd lose this chance. $400, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Murmurs rippled through the crowd now. Two people actually fighting over the MERIDIAN EXPLORER? This was unexpected entertainment. The man in the expensive jacket turned fully around to look at Rosa. He was maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from yacht clubs and golf courses, not commercial fishing. $500, he said, not looking away from her. Grimm grinned. Finally, some action. About $500. Do I hear $600? Rosa did the math again. $600 plus $1,800 meant $2,400. She had $847. Even if she spent every cent she had, she'd still be $1,600 short. But she thought about Sophia saying she was brave. Thought about Miguel hugging her and saying, "Get us the Explorer ship." Thought about another year in the moldy apartment. Another year of working 70 hours a week just to barely survive. $600, Rosa said. The man smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized this was a game he could play all day because money meant nothing to him. $1,000, he said. The warehouse went quiet. $1,000 for a partially sunken research vessel that needed tens of thousands in repairs was absurd. Everyone knew it, but this man had decided he wanted it, and he had the resources to get it. Rosa felt tears burning behind her eyes. She couldn't bid higher. Couldn't even afford what she'd already bid. This was over. Grimm looked at Rosa expectantly. Do I hear $1,100? She shook her head, unable to speak. Going once at $1,000 to bidder 14. Going twice. Grimm raised his gavel. Wait. A different voice, female, sharp with authority. Everyone turned. A woman in her 50s had stood up from the side of the room where the marina officials sat. She wore a practical jacket and had the weathered look of someone who worked on the water. Mr. Grimm, I'd like to invoke marina owner's prerogative. The buyer of Lot 27 must demonstrate ability to remove the vessel within 60 days or post a bond for salvage costs. Given the vessel's condition, I'm requiring a $5,000 removal bond in addition to the purchase price and marina fees. The man in the expensive jacket frowned. $5,000 bond? That wasn't in the listing. Marina owner's discretion, the woman said coolly. This vessel has been occupying our dock for 36 years. We want assurances it will actually be removed, not just sit there under new ownership while accumulating more fees. Grimm looked uncertain. Linda, is this legal? It's in the marina's standard terms. Check your paperwork. He flipped through his documents, found the relevant clause, and nodded reluctantly. Okay, bidder 14, can you post a $5,000 removal bond in addition to your $1,000 bid and the $1,800 in fees? The man stood up, angry now. This is ridiculous. You're changing the terms mid-auction. The terms were always there, Linda said. You just didn't read them. So, can you post the bond or not? He glared at her, clearly furious at being outmaneuvered. $5,000 is excessive. I'll post $2,000. The requirement is $5,000. Yes or no? Everyone watched the standoff. Rosa had no idea what was happening, but something about Linda's intervention felt deliberate, targeted. Finally, the man grabbed his coat. "This is absurd. Keep your damn boat." He walked out, footsteps echoing across the warehouse floor. Grim cleared his throat. "Okay then." Bidding returns to $600 from bidder 73. He looked at Rosa. "Ma'am, you still want it at $600? Rosa stood on shaking legs. "I can't afford the marina fees and the bond. I only have $847. The bond isn't required if you can demonstrate current plans for removal," Linda said, still standing. "What's your plan for the vessel?" "I want to live on it. I want to pump it out, repair it, and live aboard with my children." Whispers spread through the crowd. Someone laughed. But Linda's expression didn't change. "You'd live aboard? You and your kids?" "Yes, ma'am, if I can make it work." Linda studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "The marina fees can be worked out in a payment plan if you're actively working to restore the vessel. 6 months interest-free, $300 a month. And no removal bond required if you sign an agreement to make the ship operational or fully remove it within 2 years. Does that work for you?" "Mr. Grimm, I'd like to invoke marina owner's prerogative. The buyer of Lot 27 must demonstrate ability to remove the vessel within 60 days or post a bond for salvage costs. Given the vessel's condition, I'm requiring a $5,000 removal bond in addition to the purchase price and marina fees." The man in the expensive jacket frowned. $5,000 bond? That wasn't in the listing. "Marina owner's discretion," the woman said coolly. "This vessel has been occupying our dock for 36 years. We want assurances it will actually be removed, not just sit there under new ownership while accumulating more fees." Grimm looked uncertain. "Linda, is this legal?" "It's in the marina's standard terms. Check your paperwork." He flipped through his documents, found the relevant clause, and nodded reluctantly. "Okay, bidder 14, can you post a $5,000 removal bond in addition to your $1,000 bid and the $1,800 in fees?" The man stood up, angry now. "This is ridiculous. You're changing the terms mid-auction." "The terms were always there," Linda said. "You just didn't read them. So, can you post the bond or not?" He glared at her, clearly furious at being outmaneuvered. $5,000 is excessive. I'll post $2,000. The requirement is $5,000. Yes or no? Everyone watched the standoff. Rosa had no idea what was happening, but something about Linda's intervention felt deliberate, targeted. Finally, the man grabbed his coat. "This is absurd. Keep your damn boat." He walked out, footsteps echoing across the warehouse floor. Grim cleared his throat. "Okay then." Bidding returns to $600 from bidder 73. He looked at Rosa. "Ma'am, you still want it at $600? Rosa stood on shaking legs. "I can't afford the marina fees and the bond. I only have $847. The bond isn't required if you can demonstrate current plans for removal," Linda said, still standing. "What's your plan for the vessel?" "I want to live on it. I want to pump it out, repair it, and live aboard with my children." Whispers spread through the crowd. Someone laughed. But Linda's expression didn't change. "You'd live aboard? You and your kids?" "Yes, ma'am, if I can make it work." Linda studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "The marina fees can be worked out in a payment plan if you're actively working to restore the vessel. 6 months interest-free, $300 a month. And no removal bond required if you sign an agreement to make the ship operational or fully remove it within 2 years. Does that work for you?" "Because 36 years ago, I was a single mother working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. My father left me enough to buy the marina, but barely. I know what it looks like when someone's at the edge, when they're about to either fall or fly. You remind me of myself. And if helping you means that ship gets to matter again instead of just rotting away, then it's worth it." They stood together in the cold morning, 2 women who'd both learned that sometimes the only way forward is through the impossible. "Thank you," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion. Linda smiled. "Thank you for seeing value where everyone else saw trash. Now, go pump out your ship and make it a home. And call Frank. You're going to need him." Rosa drove back to the apartment in a daze, hardly believing what had just happened. She bought a boat, an 87-foot research vessel that was actively sinking. She committed to $300 monthly payments she could barely afford. She'd taken on a project that terrified her, and she felt more hopeful than she had in years. Sophia and Miguel were waiting when she got home, bouncing with anticipation. Miss Chun hovered in the background, clearly curious. "Well," Sophia demanded, "did you get it?" Rosa held up the key ring. "We got a boat." Miguel let out a war whoop that probably disturbed the entire building. Sophia's eyes went wide, torn between excitement and terror. "Now what?" she asked. Rosa looked at her children, at their hopeful faces and obvious fear. "Now we pump out a ship and figure out how to live on it." "That sounds insane," Sophia said. "Completely insane," Rosa agreed. "I love it," Miguel said. And despite everything, despite the impossibility and the terror and the overwhelming amount of work ahead, Rosa found herself smiling. Because for the first time in a very long time, they had something to build toward, something that belonged to them, something that might actually become the home they deserved. A sinking ship bought for $600. A desperate gamble by a single mother with no margin for error. The beginning of something extraordinary or the biggest mistake of her life. Only time would tell which it would be. But as Rosa looked at her children's faces, as she felt the weight of those brass keys in her hand, she thought maybe, just maybe, crazy might actually work out this time. The real question was what waited beneath all that water in the hold of the MERIDIAN EXPLORER, and whether Rosa Delgado was ready for what she was about to discover. The Sunday after the auction, Rosa stood on Dock 12 staring at her purchase in the cold November light. The MERIDIAN EXPLORER looked worse than she remembered, listing heavily to port, its hull stained with rust and algae, water lapping at a level that suggested catastrophic flooding below. Sophia and Miguel stood beside her, Miguel's enthusiasm visibly deflating as reality set in. "Mom," Sophia said carefully, "it's really sinking. I can see that, Mija. Like really, really sinking." "I know." Miguel tugged her sleeve. "Can we go inside?" Rosa looked at the tilted deck, the broken wheelhouse windows, the obvious structural distress. "Not yet, baby. It's not safe until we pump the water out." A truck rumbled onto the dock behind them. Frank Pierce climbed out, followed by a younger man who looked to be in his 20s, muscular and tattooed. "Morning," Frank called. "This is my nephew, Danny. He's going to help us today." Danny nodded, studying the MERIDIAN EXPLORER with the assessing eye of someone who'd seen plenty of maritime disasters. "Wow, that's really taking on water." "We established that," Sophia muttered. Frank pulled equipment from his truck bed. Industrial pumps, hoses, life jackets, waterproof flashlights, tools. "Okay, here's the plan. Rosa, you, and the kids stay on the dock. Danny and are going to assess the situation, see how bad the flooding is, and start pumping. Once we know it's structurally sound enough, we'll let you aboard." "How long will that take?" Rosa asked. "Depends on what we find. Could be a few hours. Could be days." They worked through the morning. Frank and Danny boarded the vessel carefully, testing each step before committing weight. Rosa watched them disappear into the tilted wheelhouse, then emerge on different parts of the deck, calling to each other, taking measurements, making notes. After an hour, Frank returned to the dock. His expression was grim. "How bad?" Rosa asked. "There's about 4 feet of water in the main hold. The port bilge pump failed completely. The starboard one's still trying to work, but can't keep up. Some seam welding has failed along the port hull, probably from years of stress and corrosion. Water's been coming in slowly for decades. Can you fix it?" Frank scratched his jaw. "The welding repairs alone will run about $3,000 in materials and labor. The pumps need replacing, another $1,500. Then there's the electrical system, the plumbing, structural reinforcement where the hull's compromised. You're looking at $8,000 to $10,000 just to make it watertight and minimally habitable." Rosa felt her stomach sink. She had $247 left after the auction payment. "I don't have that kind of money." "I figured." Frank leaned against the piling. "So here's what I'm thinking. I do the critical repairs at cost, materials only, no labor charge. You pay me back over time, whenever you can. We prioritize making it watertight first, then livable, then comfortable. Baby steps. Why would you do that? Because Linda Paulson called me last night. Told me about her father, about why this ship matters to her. And because I told you I'd help if you're serious. You showed up, so you're serious. Danny emerged from the wheelhouse. Uncle Frank, we can start pumping. The deck's stable enough. They set up the industrial pumps, thick hoses snaking from the hold down into the dark water, filling the ship's interior. The machines roared to life with a diesel rumble that vibrated the dock. Water began gushing out, brown and fetid, smelling of decay and rust and things that had been underwater far too long. It poured into the marina, and Rosa watched their future literally being pumped out in a foul stream. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the gray sky. Miguel got bored and played on his phone. Sophia read a book she'd brought, glancing up occasionally to check the ship's progress. Rosa couldn't look away, watching the water level slowly, painfully slowly, beginning to drop. By late afternoon, Frank called her over. We've pumped out about 3 feet. Want to come aboard and see what you bought? Rosa's heart hammered as she followed Frank across the narrow gangway onto the tilted deck. The steel beneath her feet felt solid, substantial despite the neglect. Up close, she could see the ship's construction, the massive rivets holding hull plates together, the thick steel that had been built to withstand ocean storms. Frank led her to a hatch. Main access to the hold. Watch your step, it's steep and everything's wet. They descended a metal ladder into semi-darkness lit by Frank's industrial flashlight. Rosa's breath caught. The hold was enormous. It stretched the length of the ship, maybe 70 feet, divided into sections by bulkheads and internal walls. Water still covered the floor at about a foot deep, but she could see the space. Could see the research equipment still mounted to walls, the storage lockers, the laboratory benches bolted to the deck. This section was the main research lab, Frank explained, sweeping his light across the space. They'd bring up samples, analyze them here. That whole area was for cataloging and storage. The crew quarters are aft, through that bulkhead. Galley and mess are midship. The bridge and captain's quarters are up top. Rosa moved carefully through the ankle-deep water, her mind reeling. The space was incredible. Even with 4 feet of water gone, even with the decay and rust and obvious damage, the ship's potential was staggering. She ran her hand along a laboratory bench. The surface was stainless steel, corroded but intact. Storage cabinets lined the walls, their doors swollen shut with moisture and time. "What's in the cabinets?" she asked. "No idea. They're all locked or rusted shut. Probably research materials, equipment, supplies. The university just abandoned everything when they lost funding." Rosa tried a cabinet door. It didn't budge. She tried another. Same result. The ship held its secrets behind layers of corrosion and neglect. They moved aft through a watertight door into the crew quarters. 6 small cabins lined a narrow corridor, each with a bunk, a small desk, and a porthole. The bunks were bare, mattresses long since removed or rotted away, but the spaces were intact. "These could be bedrooms," Rosa said quietly. "Sophia could have one. Miguel could have one. I could have one. They'll need cleaning, new bunks, electrical work, ventilation. But yeah, they could be bedrooms." The galley was in worse shape. The old appliances had corroded into abstract sculptures of rust. The counters were waterlogged and swollen. But the space existed, and spaces could be rebuilt. Back on deck, as the sun started to set, Rosa stood at the rail looking out at the marina. Miguel and Sophia had ventured aboard, exploring the wheelhouse under Danny's supervision. She could hear their excited voices as they pretended to steer the ship. Frank joined her at the rail. "What do you think?" "I think it's the biggest, scariest, most impossible project I've ever considered." "That's accurate. I think if I can somehow make it work, my children will have a home unlike any other home they'd ever have." "Also accurate." Rosa turned to face him. "What I need to do first." Frank pulled out a notepad. "We pump the rest of the water out. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon. Then I inspect the hull thoroughly, identify all the leaks and weak points. I weld patches over the compromised seams, probably take a week. While I'm doing that, you and the kids start cleaning. And I mean everything. This ship has 36 years of grime, bird droppings, rust, and decay covering every surface. You scrub, you haul trash, you make it livable. Think you can handle that? I cleaned fish guts for minimum wage this morning. I can handle scrubbing a ship. Frank smiled. I figured you'd say that. The pumping continued into Monday. Rosa had to work her shifts, so Frank and Danny handled the mechanical work while she was gone. By Tuesday evening, the hold was dry enough to walk through without waiting. Frank started his inspection, crawling through every compartment with welding chalk, marking the damage. Rosa arrived after her evening shift at the harbor master's office to find him sitting on the deck, his notepad covered in notes. "How bad?" she asked, bracing for terrible news. "Could be worse. There are 17 seam failures along the port hull, various sizes. The keel seems sound. The bulkheads are solid. The engine mounts are intact, though the engines themselves are completely seized and probably not worth rebuilding. But the hull structure is fundamentally good. She was built solid in '62, back when they over-engineered everything. So you can fix it? I can make it watertight. Getting it actually seaworthy again would cost $100,000 easy. But for living aboard? Yeah, I can fix it." They started work on Wednesday. Frank set up welding equipment, his torch throwing blue-white sparks as he sealed seams and patched holes. The smell of hot metal and welding flux filled the marina. Rosa began the cleaning with a determination bordering on obsession. She worked her morning shift at the fish plant, rushed to the ship, cleaned until her evening shift, then returned to clean more. Sophia and Miguel helped when they weren't in school, hauling bags of trash, scrubbing walls, attacking decades of grime with brushes and determination. The first week was brutal. Rosa had never worked so hard in her life, and that was saying something. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back screamed. She came home every night covered in rust and grime, so exhausted she fell asleep in her clothes. But progress happened. By the end of week 1, they'd hauled out 60 bags of trash and debris. The main hold was starting to look like an actual space instead of a maritime garbage dump. Frank had sealed 8 of the 17 hull breaches. Week 2 brought new challenges. Rosa discovered the water tanks were filled with stagnant water that smelled like death. She spent an entire day draining and scrubbing them while trying not to vomit. The electrical system turned out to be worse than Frank had estimated. Wiring had corroded throughout the ship, meaning everything would need to be replaced or bypassed. But they also found unexpected treasures. In one of the locked storage cabinets that Miguel finally pried open, they discovered boxes of preserved research samples, bottles, and jars carefully labeled with locations and dates from surveys in the 1970s. Marine specimens, sediment samples, water chemistry data, all meticulously cataloged and abandoned. Sophia held up a jar containing what looked like fossilized coral. "Is this worth anything?" Rosa had no idea. "Maybe. We should probably contact the university. This was their research." But when Rosa called the University of Maritime Sciences, she was transferred through 4 departments before reaching someone who admitted they'd never heard of the MERIDIAN EXPLORER and had no records of any research vessel from the 1980s. Budget cuts and administrative turnover had apparently erased the ship from institutional memory. The research samples sat in their cabinet, orphaned memories of scientific work that no longer mattered to anyone. By week 3, Frank had sealed all the hull breaches and installed new bilge pumps. The ship no longer took on water. It still listed slightly to port, something about the weight distribution that would need to be addressed, but it was watertight. "You own a floating ship," Frank announced. "Still not seaworthy, not even close, but it'll stay afloat." Rosa stood on the deck that evening after Frank left, watching the sun set over the marina. The MERIDIAN EXPLORER didn't look much different from the outside. Still rusted, still weathered, still obviously damaged. But it wasn't sinking anymore. That felt like a victory. Miguel appeared beside her. "When can we move in?" "Not yet, baby. We need electricity, heat, water, bathrooms that work. But soon." Rosa thought about the apartment with its mold and crime and monthly rent that built nothing. "Soon, I promise." The electrical work took another 3 weeks. Frank brought in a friend who specialized in marine electrical systems, a woman named Keiko who looked at the ship's wiring and laughed. "This is original 1962 electrical," she said. "I'm surprised it worked even when the ship was operational. You need a complete rewiring if you want to live here safely." "How much?" Rosa asked, dreading the answer. "Materials, about $2,000. Labor, normally I'd charge $5,000, but Linda Paulson called me and explained the situation. I'll do it for $1,500 total if you help with the grunt work." Rosa had learned not to question why people kept helping her. Linda had apparently made multiple calls, built a network of people willing to assist this crazy single mother trying to turn a research vessel into a home. Maybe it was the novelty. Maybe it was genuine kindness. Maybe it was respect for Linda's father and what the ship had once been. Whatever the reason, Rosa was grateful. She arranged a payment plan with Keiko. $300 now, $150 a month until paid off. The same structure she had with Frank for the welding work. She was accumulating debts measured in hundreds rather than thousands. Manageable if she kept working, if nothing catastrophic happened, if the universe showed mercy. December arrived with cold rain and shortened days. The electrical work progressed slowly. Keiko ran new wiring through the ship's conduits, installed a shore power connection, replaced the circuit breakers and distribution panels. Rosa helped by drilling holes, pulling wire, holding lights while Keiko worked in tight spaces. Sophia and Miguel continued cleaning, transforming the crew quarters into spaces that might actually become bedrooms. They scraped rust, sanded wood, painted bulkheads with marine paint Frank had acquired at cost. The ship slowly, painfully slowly, began to look less like a derelict and more like a potential home. In mid-December, Keiko flipped the main breaker and power flowed through the ship for the first time in over 30 years. Lights flickered, steadied, illuminated the interior with harsh fluorescent reality. They all stood in the main hold, staring at the working lights like they were witnessing a miracle. "You have electricity," Keiko announced. "Don't overload the circuits, be careful with space heaters, and get a carbon monoxide detector before you run anything with combustion. But you have power." That night, Rosa brought her kids aboard and they walked through the illuminated ship. Every shadow was now visible, every corner exposed. The lights revealed just how much work remained, but also proved that progress was real. They stood in what would become Sophia's cabin, a 10-by-8 space with a porthole looking out at the marina. The walls were freshly painted, the floor scrubbed clean. It smelled like paint and cleaning products instead of decay. "This is really mine?" Sophia asked quietly. "Really yours." Sophia ran her hand along the wall, then turned to Rosa with tears in her eyes. "I've never had my own room before." Rosa pulled her daughter into a hug. "I know, Mija, but now you will." Miguel's cabin was next door, identical in size, but with a porthole facing the opposite direction. He immediately started planning where his bed would go, where he'd put his toys, how he'd arrange his space. Rosa's cabin was aft, slightly larger, with 2 portholes and enough room for a bed, a desk, and storage. It was more space than she'd had in years, private space where she could close a door and have a moment of peace. The galley would need completely rebuilding, but the mess area adjacent to it could work as a living room. There was a table bolted to the floor, bench seating along the walls, space for a TV or bookshelf. It was all still rough, still obviously a work in progress. But standing there in the electric light, with her children exploring their future rooms, Rosa felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Christmas was coming in 10 days. They'd spend in the moldy apartment one last time, because the ship didn't have heat yet, didn't have running water, wasn't quite habitable. But soon, very soon, the plumbing took another 2 weeks. A friend of Frank's, a grizzled plumber named Marcus, assessed the situation and shook his head. "Original pipes are shot, corroded through in multiple places. You need new water lines, new waste lines, new fixtures, and you need to connect to the marina's water and sewage hookups." "How much?" Rosa asked, automatically bracing for financial impact. Marcus quoted her $2,500 for materials and labor. Another payment plan. Another few hundred now, monthly installments after. Another act of kindness from Linda's network of people who decided this project was worth supporting. Rosa didn't question it anymore. She just said thank you and worked as hard as she could to prove their faith wasn't misplaced. The plumbing work extended through Christmas and into January. Rosa and the kids spent Christmas Day on the ship, bringing sandwiches and hot chocolate, working on painting and cleaning even though it was a holiday. They'd agreed presents weren't important this year. The ship was their present. Miguel hung homemade decorations in his cabin. Sophia helped Rosa install storage shelves. They worked in their winter coats because the heat wasn't operational yet, but they worked together, building something that mattered. By mid-January, they had running water. Cold running water, because the water heater was another project entirely, but water nonetheless. The heads, marine toilets, worked. The sink in the galley worked. They could wash their hands aboard their own ship. The heat came next. Frank located 2 marine diesel heaters at Salvage yard, units from a decommissioned fishing vessel. He installed them himself, running new fuel lines from a small diesel tank he mounted on deck. When he fired them up in late January, warmth flooded through the ship's compartments. "You have heat," Frank announced. "Not great heat, but heat. This boat's going to be cold in winter no matter what you do. Steel hull, you're basically living inside a metal box. But these heaters will keep you from freezing." Rosa stood in the main hold, feeling warm air for the first time. "When can we move in?" Frank looked around at the ship they'd spent 3 months transforming. "Technically, now. You have power, water, heat, working toilets. The cabins are cleaned and painted. It's not finished, not by a long shot, but it's livable." Rosa felt tears threatening. After 3 months of brutal work, after spending every spare moment and dollar, after doubting herself 1,000 times, they'd actually done it. They'd turned a sinking ship into a home. She called Sophia and Miguel that evening. They were at the apartment, finishing homework under Miss Chen's supervision. "Pack your things," Rosa said. "We're moving onto the boat this weekend." The response was immediate chaos. Miguel's whoop, Sophia's excited questions, Miss Chen's worried inquiries about safety and whether it was really ready. But Rosa was firm. They were moving. Saturday, February 3rd, they loaded their possessions into Rosa's Camry and made 3 trips from the apartment to the marina. They didn't have much. Clothes, books, some kitchen items, bedding, Miguel's toys, Sophia's art supplies. Everything they owned fit in the car. Miss Chun came to help, bringing a housewarming gift of towels and dish soap. She toured the ship with frank skepticism. "It's very industrial," she said carefully. "It's a research vessel," Sophia replied with pride. "It used to explore the ocean, and now you're living on it." "We own it," Miguel announced. "Nobody can make us leave. It's ours." Miss Chin looked at Rosa. "You're sure about this?" Rosa looked around at the ship they'd spent 3 months rebuilding, at the fresh paint and working lights, at her children's excited faces. "I'm sure." They spent that first night aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER bundled in blankets, because the heat couldn't quite fight off the cold. They ate dinner at the mess table, sandwiches and chips, nothing fancy. The ship creaked and groaned as the tide shifted, sounds Rosa would learn to interpret over time. But when Rosa tucked Miguel into his cabin, into the bunk she'd assembled from salvage parts and new wood, he hugged her tight and said, "This is the best house we've ever had." Sophia, in her own cabin next door, wrote in her journal by the light of a lamp Frank had wired. Rosa saw her daughter's face, concentrated and peaceful, and felt the weight of 3 months' struggle lift slightly. In her own cabin, Rosa lay in bed listening to the water lap against the hull. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The auction, the terrible risk, the overwhelming amount of work. The kindness of strangers who'd become allies. The transformation of a dying ship into a living home. She thought about the payment plans she still owed, the work that still needed doing, the challenges winter would bring. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. They had a home. They had space. They had something that belonged to them. Rosa fell asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship, to the sound of water beneath the hull, to the knowledge that her children were safe and warm in their own rooms aboard a vessel that had once explored oceans and now sheltered dreams. But she had no idea what else the Meridian Explorer was hiding. The discovery would come in 2 weeks, when they finally opened the captain's quarters and found the sealed storage room beyond. The discovery that would change everything. Living aboard the Meridian Explorer was nothing like living in an apartment, and the differences became apparent immediately. The ship moved, constantly shifting with the tide and wind. Objects left on tables slid slowly to port because of the permanent list. The steel hull conducted sound like a drum, magnifying every footstep, every dropped object, every whisper. But it was theirs. Rosa established routines. Morning wake-up at 6 a.m., breakfast at the mess table, kids off to school by 7:30. She still worked the morning shift at the fish plant, but she'd given notice on the evening shift at the harbor master's office. Living at the marina made that job redundant, and she needed the time to continue working on the ship. The weekend cleaning gig she kept. The money was necessary, and the work flexible. Sophia and Miguel adapted with the resilience of children. They navigated the ship's corridors with increasing confidence, learned to dress in layers because the heat was inconsistent, discovered that portholes made better windows than they'd expected. School became interesting. Other kids asked about living on a boat. Miguel loved the attention, embellishing stories about their explorer ship. Sophia was more reserved, but Rosa noticed her daughter carrying herself differently, standing taller, less ashamed of being poor because now they were poor people living on a research vessel, which was at least interesting. The marina community slowly accepted them. Other liveaboards, people who'd chosen boats over houses for various reasons, offered advice on winter living, on managing condensation, on where to shower since the Meridian Explorer shower didn't work yet. Linda Paulson checked in regularly, usually showing up with coffee and questions about how things were going. She never said explicitly, but Rosa understood Linda was watching over them the way she'd watched over the ship for decades, protecting something that mattered. 2 weeks after moving aboard, Rosa finally tackled the captain's quarters. Located on the upper deck behind the wheelhouse, the captain's cabin had been locked since they'd bought the ship. Rosa had tried the brass keys from the auction, but none fit the corroded lock. Frank had said he'd get around to picking or cutting it, but he'd been busy with other repairs. Rosa had let it wait, focusing on making the crew quarters livable. But now, with the basic living spaces functional, curiosity got the better of her. She borrowed a crowbar from Frank's toolbox and attacked the lock on a Saturday afternoon while the kids were at the marina laundry room with Miss Chun. The lock was old, the wood around it soft with rot. It gave way with a crack that echoed across the deck. The door swung inward, hinges screaming. Stale air rushed out, decades of containment released in a single breath. Rosa coughed and waved her hand, waiting for the worst of it to clear. Then she stepped inside. The captain's quarters were larger than the crew cabins, with 2 portholes, a built-in desk, and a bunk that had somehow retained its mattress. Unlike the rest of the ship, this space hadn't flooded. It sat high enough in the structure that the water ingress had never reached it. Everything was covered in dust, but relatively intact. Rosa's flashlight beam swept across the space. Charts on the walls, yellow with age. A bookshelf holding navigation references and journals. The desk cluttered with papers and nautical instruments. She moved carefully through the room, not touching anything yet, just observing. The captain who'd lived here had left in a hurry. Coffee cups still on the desk, papers scattered like they'd been reviewed and abandoned mid-task. A jacket hanging on a hook, pockets sagging with the weight of items still inside. Rosa checked the jacket pockets. Found a wallet with ID for Captain James Rourke, expired in 1987. Some cash, about $40 in bills with designs she barely recognized as outdated. A photograph of a woman and 2 children. She set the wallet aside and turned to the desk. The papers were mostly navigation logs, maintenance records, requisition forms for research supplies. Standard administrative work from the ship's operational period. But beneath the surface papers, Rosa found something more interesting. A leather journal, thick and weathered, filled with handwritten entries. She opened it carefully. The first entry was dated March 1982. Beginning new survey season. University funding secured for another 18 months. The board continues to question the value of our work, but we've proven the historical significance of this coastline. The artifacts we've recovered tell a story nobody expected. This season, we return to Site Omega. I believe there's more there. Much more. Rosa flipped through the journal. Entry after entry, detailed research expeditions, dive operations, artifact discoveries. Captain Rourke wrote with the passion of someone obsessed with his work. July 1983. Site Omega continues to yield extraordinary finds. Today we recovered 17 more coins, all dated between 1640 to 1680. The concentration suggests a significant deposit, possibly a cargo hold that's been covered by sediment for 3 centuries. Dr. Morrison believes we're looking at a Spanish merchant vessel, possibly carrying colonial tribute. If we can locate the main wreck structure, this could rewrite our understanding of early colonial trade routes. October 1984. The university is becoming difficult. They want results that generate headlines, but careful archaeological work takes time. I tried to explain that site. Omega represents potentially the most significant maritime archaeological find in the region, but all they care about is budget justifications and donor cultivation. Meanwhile, we sit on top of history that could fill museums and rewrite textbooks. Rosa kept reading, increasingly absorbed. The journal painted a picture of academic research fighting against institutional pressure, of passionate scientists struggling with bureaucracy and funding constraints. Then she reached entries from late 1986, and the tone changed. November 1986. The decision has been made. University funding ends in March 1987. They're abandoning the program entirely. 30 years of research terminated because it doesn't generate immediate returns. Dr. Morrison is devastated. The graduate students are scrambling for new positions. And Site Omega will remain unexplored, its secrets buried in silt and time. December 1986. I've made a decision. If the university won't continue the work, I'll preserve what we've found. I've been removing artifact from the official collection logs, storing them here on the ship. Not theft, not really. Saving them from being scattered to various institutions, locked away in storage rooms forgotten. These artifacts tell a cohesive story. They should stay together. January 1987. The collection is complete. Everything we recovered from Site Omega over 5 years. Nearly 2,000 individual pieces. Coins, pottery, navigation instruments, personal items. All cataloged, all carefully preserved, all hidden aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. When the university finally recognizes the value of this work, when funding becomes available again, it will all be here. Waiting. Protected. Rosa's heart started racing. Artifacts? A collection hidden on the ship? She flipped to the final entries. March 1987. Today was our last research voyage. Tomorrow the university officially seizes the ship for unpaid operating costs. They've already stripped most of the equipment. They don't know about the collection, don't know what I've saved. I've sealed the storage compartment behind the captain's quarters, hidden the entrance behind the wall paneling. Future archaeologists, if any ever return to this work, will find a treasure trove waiting. I've left documentation in the hidden compartment explaining Site Omega's location and significance. My life's work, preserved for those who will eventually understand its value. The journal ended there. Rosa flipped through the remaining pages, but they were blank. Captain Rourke had hidden a collection aboard the ship, a significant collection of archaeological artifacts. And then the university had abandoned the MERIDIAN EXPLORER, and the captain had presumably moved on, taking the secret with him. For 36 years, the collection had waited. Rosa stood in the dusty captain's quarters, journal trembling in her hands, trying to process what she'd just learned. There were artifacts hidden somewhere on this ship, possibly valuable artifacts, based on Rourke's descriptions. She examined the walls of the cabin, tapping on panels, looking for hidden compartments. The aft wall sounded hollow. She found a seam in the paneling about 3 feet from the deck, barely visible under decades of paint. Rosa got the crowbar again and carefully pried at the seam. The panel resisted, then popped free with a crack. Behind it was a dark space, a compartment built into the ship's structure. She grabbed her flashlight and shined it into the darkness. Shelves. Dozens of shelves. And on those shelves, boxes. Plastic storage containers, the kind designed to be waterproof and airtight. Rosa's hand shook as she pulled out the first box. It was labeled in permanent marker, Site Omega Coins Spanish Colonial, 1640 to 1680. She opened it. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were coins. Hundreds of them. Old coins, tarnished and encrusted, but unmistakably real. Each one was individually bagged with a label noting recovery date and grid coordinates. Rosa set that box aside and pulled out another. Site Omega, navigation instruments, 17th century. Inside were compasses, dividers, parallel rulers, all corroded but intact. Box after box. Pottery fragments. Personal items. Religious medallions. Buttons and buckles. Ship fittings. Every container carefully labeled. Every item meticulously preserved. And all of it, according to the journal, recovered from what Captain Rourke believed was a significant Spanish merchant vessel. Rosa sat on the deck of the captain's quarters, surrounded by boxes, her mind reeling. She'd bought a sinking research ship for $600. She'd spent 3 months making it habitable. And now she'd discovered that hidden in the captain's storage compartment was an archaeological collection that had been missing for 36 years. A collection that Captain Rourke had described as potentially significant enough to rewrite textbooks. She needed help. Needed someone who could tell her what this actually meant, what these artifacts were worth, whether she had any legal right to them. Rosa pulled out her phone and called the one person who seemed to understand impossible situations. Linda Paulson answered on the second ring. Rosa? Everything okay? I need you to come to the ship. Right now. I found something. Found what? Rosa looked at the boxes surrounding her, at the centuries-old artifacts that had been hidden aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER since 1987. History, she said quietly. I found history. Linda arrived 15 minutes later, moving across the dock with the speed of someone who'd spent her life responding to maritime emergencies. She climbed aboard, found Rosa still sitting in the captain's quarters, surrounded by storage boxes. What am I looking at? Linda asked. Rosa handed her Captain Rourke's journal. Read the last few entries. From late 1986 and early 1987. Linda read in silence, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something that might have been awe. My father, she said slowly. My father was part of this research team. Dr. Morrison, that was his name. He was the lead archaeologist. Did he ever mention Site Omega? No. After the program ended, after he died, my mother and I went through his papers. There was nothing about a site by that name. I always assumed all his research had been archived by the university. Linda knelt beside the boxes and opened one at random. Inside were pottery sherds, fragments of what had probably been plates or jars, each piece labeled and preserved. This is real, she whispered. This is actual archaeological material from my father's surveys. The question is, what do I do with it? Rosa said, legally, do I even own this? The artifacts were taken from the university's collection. Captain Rourke removed them without authorization. That's technically theft, right? Linda thought carefully. 36 years ago, Rourke removed artifacts from a university collection that was about to be dismantled. The university then abandoned the ship where he'd hidden them. You purchased the ship and everything aboard it at a legal auction. I'd argue you own them now, same as you own the ship itself. But they're archaeological artifacts. Don't they belong in a museum? Maybe. Probably. But first, we need to know what we're actually dealing with. Linda pulled out her phone. I know someone. Dr. Patricia Chun, marine archaeologist, works for the State Historical Preservation Office. She was a friend of my father's. If anyone can evaluate this collection properly and discreetly, it's her. Why discreetly? Linda's expression turned serious. Because the moment word gets out that you found a lost archaeological collection, you're going to have a university claiming ownership, the state trying to seize it as public heritage, treasure hunters showing up, media circus. All of it. Before that happens, we need to know exactly what this is and what your rights are. Rosa thought about the last 3 months. The legal challenges, the financial strain, the constant work. She'd fought so hard just to create a home for her children. Now she'd stumbled onto something that could bring all that crashing down in a wave of legal complications. "Okay," she said, "call your friend. But Linda, I need you to understand something. I don't want to profit from this. I don't want to sell artifacts to collectors or keep things that belong in museums. I just want to do right by this discovery and protect my family. Can we do both?" Linda smiled. "That's exactly what my father would have said. And yes, I think we could do both." Dr. Patricia Chun arrived the next morning, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that immediately assessed everything with scientific precision. She climbed aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER, greeted Linda with a warm hug, and turned to Rosa. "Linda tells me you found something interesting." Rosa led her to the captain's quarters and the hidden compartment. Patricia's reaction was immediate and profound. She knelt beside the boxes, opened one, examined the contents with hands that shook slightly. "This is Morrison's work," she said quietly. "I recognize his cataloging system. He was meticulous, obsessive about documentation." She looked up at Rosa. "Do you understand what you have here? Old artifacts. A lost collection from one of the most promising maritime archaeological projects in the region." Morrison and Rourke were onto something significant. Then the funding was cut, and everyone assumed the artifacts had been distributed to various institutions. Nobody knew Rourke had kept them together. Patricia spent the next 4 hours examining boxes, taking photographs, making notes. She handled each artifact with reverence, frequently pausing to shake her head in amazement. Finally, she sat back and addressed Rosa and Linda. "This collection represents approximately 5 years of careful archaeological recovery from what appears to be a Spanish merchant vessel that sank sometime in the mid-17th century. Based on the artifacts, I'd estimate the ship was carrying colonial tribute, trade goods, and personal possessions of passengers. There are roughly 2,000 individual pieces here, ranging from mundane pottery to extremely rare navigation instruments." "What's it worth?" Rosa asked. Patricia hesitated. "That's complicated. Archaeological artifacts have historical value that's separate from monetary value. But if we're talking about market value, if these were legally sold to collectors, we're looking at somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. The coins alone probably account for half that." Rosa felt the world tilt. $500,000 in artifacts had been sitting behind a wall panel while she was scrubbing rust and welding leaks. But, Patricia continued, selling archaeological artifact from a documented scientific excavation would be ethically questionable and possibly illegal, depending on jurisdiction. These artifacts should be properly studied, cataloged, and placed in public institutions where they can contribute to historical understanding. "So they're worth a fortune, but I can't actually access that fortune," Rosa said. "That's one way to look at it. Another way is that you've discovered something historically significant, and you have the opportunity to make sure it's preserved and shared properly." Patricia studied Rosa carefully. "Linda told me your situation. Single mother, working multiple jobs, turned a sinking ship into a home. I respect that enormously, and I want to help you navigate this in a way that protects both the artifacts and your interests." "Ow!" Patricia pulled out her tablet. "The state has a program for significant archaeological finds on private property. You donate the collection to a qualified institution, you get a tax deduction for the full appraised value. With a collection worth $400,000, that's a substantial deduction." "I don't make enough money to benefit from tax deductions," Rosa said. "Not immediately, but that deduction can be carried forward for years. As your income increases, it reduces your tax burden. It's not cash in hand, but it's significant long-term value." Patricia paused. "There's also another possibility. If you're willing to work with us, the State Historical Preservation Office could partner with you to create an exhibition. Part of the collection would go to major museums, but part could be displayed here, aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. Turn the ship into a floating museum, telling the story both of the original archaeological research and of how the collection was lost and found." Rosa looked around the captain's quarters, trying to imagine tourists and school groups, touring the ship. A floating museum? Your ship has historical significance as a research vessel. Add in the story of Captain Rourke hiding this collection, your discovery of it 36 years later, the original archaeological work. It's a complete narrative. People would pay to tour it. Schools would bring students. You could generate revenue while preserving the collection in its proper context. I don't know how to run a museum, but I do, Linda said. And between Patricia's expertise and my marina connections, we could make it work. Rosa felt overwhelmed. She'd been living aboard the ship for 2 weeks. She was still figuring out how to keep the heat working consistently. Now, they were talking about turning it into a museum. Can I think about it? She asked. Patricia smiled. Of course. But Rosa, while you're thinking, I need to document this collection properly. With your permission, I'd like to photograph and catalog everything over the next few weeks. Create a comprehensive record. Whatever you decide to do with the artifacts, that documentation will be essential. Okay. Yes. Do whatever you need to do. Over the following weeks, Patricia became a regular presence aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. She arrived early most mornings, worked through the day, photographing and examining artifacts, making detailed notes on each piece. Rosa watched the process with growing fascination. Patricia explained the historical context of various items, what they revealed about 17th century colonial trade, how they fit into broader patterns of maritime commerce. The coins alone told a story. Most were Spanish silver reals, the currency of colonial trade, minted in Mexico and Peru. Some bore the marks of the ships that had carried them. A few were rare dates that made Patricia actually gasp when she discovered them. This one, Patricia said, holding up a coin carefully, is from 1652, Lima Mint, with the pillars and waves design. There are maybe 3 dozen of these known to exist. In mint condition, it could sell for $50,000. In this condition, probably $20,000. Rosa stared at the coin. $20,000 in a single piece of metal smaller than her thumbnail. But she was starting to understand something important. The individual monetary value wasn't the point. The collection's significance came from being complete, from telling a coherent story about a moment in history when ships carried treasure and dreams across oceans, when some of those ships sank, and when centuries later archaeologists recovered fragments of those lost stories. Breaking up the collection to sell pieces would destroy that narrative, would turn history into commodity. Rosa thought about Captain Rourke's journal, about how he'd hidden the artifacts to keep them together, about his belief that they should remain unified. He'd been right. By mid-March, Patricia had completed her initial assessment. She sat with Rosa and Linda in the ship's mess, her tablet filled with documentation. I've cataloged 1,847 individual artifacts, Patricia reported. The collection includes 623 coins, 412 pottery fragments, 187 personal items, 94 ship fittings, 76 navigation instruments, and assorted other pieces. Total appraised value, based on conservative estimates, is $495,000. Rosa absorbed that number. Almost $500,000. Sitting aboard her ship. The State Historical Society wants the collection, Patricia continued. They're prepared to offer it as a donation arrangement with full tax benefits, immediate accession into their archives, and consideration for a major exhibition. That's the safe option, the conventional option. Your name would be attached as the donor. You'd get the tax benefits, and the artifacts would be properly preserved. What's the other option? Rosa asked. Patricia smiled. The ambitious option. We create a maritime heritage center here, aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER. We establish a nonprofit, get proper museum accreditation, bring in conservation equipment. Display maybe a third of the collection here. Loan another third to major institutions for exhibitions. Keep the final third in secured storage for research access. You become the director. Linda provides the marina space. I serve as chief curator. We tell this whole story, from 17th century shipwreck to 1980s research to present-day discovery. We turn your home into something that serves education, preservation, and your family's future. How is that financially sustainable? Rosa asked. Admission fees, educational programs, grants, donations. Maritime museums can be viable if they're well managed and tell compelling stories. This story is compelling. Linda leaned forward. The marina has been looking for ways to attract more visitors. Having a maritime museum on site would benefit both the museum and our business. I'd waive your slip fees in exchange for a revenue-sharing agreement on museum admissions. You'd retain residential rights to the lower deck while the upper deck and main hold become exhibition spaces. Rosa looked between them. You've been planning this. We've been discussing possibilities, Patricia admitted. But the decision is yours. You can donate everything to the State Historical Society tomorrow and walk away with tax benefits. Or you can build something extraordinary. Rosa thought about Sophia and Miguel, about giving them not just a home, but a legacy. Thought about Captain Rourke's hidden collection finally serving its intended purpose. Thought about Linda's father and all the researchers whose work had been nearly forgotten. How long would it take to set up a maritime museum? With proper planning, funding, and approvals? Probably 18 months to 2 years before we could open to the public. And in the meantime, we protect the collection, seek grants, build infrastructure, and spread the word. Generate interest so that when we open, people are ready to visit. Rosa sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was a single mother who'd worked in a fish processing plant 3 months ago. Now she was being asked to become a museum director, but she thought about something Sophia had said when they'd first moved aboard. This is the best house we've ever had. Rosa sat in the captain's quarters, now her office, staring at the rejection letter. Beside her, in archival boxes, sat artifacts worth nearly $500,000. But nobody wanted to fund their preservation because she didn't have a proven track record. She called Patricia with the news. "That's okay," Patricia said calmly. "First applications usually get rejected. We try again with different funders. The Maritime Preservation Society, the Historical Archaeology Trust, regional tourism grants. We keep applying until someone says yes. How many applications? However many it takes." So Rosa kept applying. She learned to write grant proposals in her sleep, learned the language funders wanted to hear, educational outcomes and community engagement and sustainable programming. Meanwhile, Patricia worked on the collection itself. She'd received permission from the state to temporarily house the artifacts aboard the MERIDIAN EXPLORER while museum plans developed. Each artifact was photographed, cataloged in a digital database, and rehoused in proper archival storage. The work was meticulous and slow. Some days Patricia would spend 8 hours examining a single box of pottery sherds, documenting each fragment, noting patterns and markings. "Why does it take so long?" Miguel asked one afternoon, watching Patricia photograph coins through a macro lens. "Because each piece tells part of a story," Patricia explained. "These coins traveled from Peru to Mexico to Spain, where they were supposed to. Instead, they ended up at the bottom of the ocean for 300 years. If I rush, I might miss details that help us understand that journey." Miguel absorbed this seriously. "So you like a detective?" "Exactly like a detective. Except my mysteries are centuries old." Sophia had become Patricia's unofficial assistant. After school, she'd come aboard and help with simple cataloging tasks, measuring artifacts, recording weights, updating spreadsheets. Patricia paid her a small stipend from her own pocket, and Sophia guarded those earnings with fierce pride. "I'm saving for college," she told Rosa. "Dr. Chun says archaeologists need degrees." Rosa felt her throat tighten. 6 months ago, college had been an impossible fantasy. Now her daughter was saving for it while working aboard their floating museum-to-be. It may a breakthrough. The Regional Arts Council approved a $15,000 grant for innovative cultural programming in underserved communities. It wasn't the $75,000 they'd requested from the Maritime Foundation, but it was something. Rosa and Linda celebrated with cheap wine in the marina office, actually allowing themselves to feel optimistic. "This is real," Linda said. "We're actually doing this." "We're trying to do this," Rosa corrected. "We're very slowly, probably foolishly trying to do this. What if it could be even more than a house? What if it could be a place that mattered, that taught, that preserved something valuable for future generations. "Let's do it," Rosa said. "Let's build the museum." Patricia and Linda both smiled. The three women shook hands over the mess table, sealing an agreement that would transform a sinking research vessel into something neither of them could quite imagine yet. Outside, through the porthole, Rosa could see Miguel and Sophia playing on the dock with other marina kids. They were laughing, running, being children in a way they hadn't been able to in the moldy apartment. They'd moved here for safety and space. Now they were building something bigger. Rosa had bought a sunken ship for $600, expecting to gain a home. Instead, she discovered $495 million worth of history and a purpose she'd never anticipated. The real work was about to begin. The transformation of the MERIDIAN EXPLORER from floating home to maritime heritage center began with paperwork. Mountains of paperwork. Nonprofit incorporation documents, museum accreditation applications, historical society registrations, insurance policies, safety certifications, educational program proposals, grant applications. Rosa sat at the mess table night after night, reading through documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Terms like 501c, 3 status, and collections management policy, an interpretive framework swam before her exhausted eyes. Patricia helped when she could, translating bureaucratic language into something comprehensible. Linda handled the marina-side logistics, drawing up agreements about space usage and revenue sharing. But ultimately, Rosa was the one who had to understand it all, sign it all, take responsibility for it all. She still worked mornings at the fish processing plant. The museum was a future dream, but rent, slip fees now, and food and utilities were present necessities. She couldn't quit her job until the museum generated income, which was at least 18 months away. So Rosa lived a split existence. Mornings gutting fish for minimum wage, afternoons filling out grant applications and learning museum administration, evenings helping Sophia and Miguel with homework and maintaining the ship. She slept maybe 5 hours a night, running on coffee and determination. By late March, they'd established the Meridian Maritime Heritage Foundation as a registered nonprofit. Rosa was listed as executive director, a title that felt absurd given that 6 months ago she'd been unable to afford a security deposit on an apartment. The first grant application went to the National Maritime Heritage Foundation. They were requesting $75,000 for initial museum development, conservation equipment, display cases, educational materials, basic renovations to convert the ship's spaces for public access. Patricia wrote most of the application, but Rosa had to present it. Had to explain in a formal proposal why a sunken research vessel containing a lost archaeological collection deserved funding. She worked on her statement for 2 weeks, revising obsessively. Finally submitted it in early April. The response came 6 weeks later. Denied. While the project shows promise, the Foundation's current funding priorities focus on established institutions with proven track records. Same thing. The $15,000 went toward immediate necessities. Professional liability insurance for the museum. Basic safety upgrades to make the ship accessible to visitors. A computer and printer for the office. Educational materials. It disappeared frighteningly fast, but each purchase moved them incrementally closer to being a functioning institution. Summer arrived, bringing tourists to the marina. Linda suggested they start offering informal tours, not official museum operations yet, but casual visits to generate interest and revenue. Charge $10 per person, Linda proposed. Show people the ship, tell them the story, let them see a few artifacts. Get them excited for when the Real Museum opens. Rosa was terrified. "I'm not a tour guide. I don't know how to talk to groups. You know the ship better than anyone. You know the story. Just tell it." They started tours in June, advertising with a simple sign at the marina entrance. Historic Research Vessel Tours. $10. The first weekend, 3 people showed up. Rosa stammered through the presentation, forgetting half of what she planned to say, but the visitors seemed charmed by her obvious nervousness and genuine passion. One of them left a $20 tip. Word spread slowly. By mid-July, they were getting 10 to 15 visitors per weekend. Rosa's confidence grew with each tour. She learned what details resonated with people. The story of buying the ship for $600, Captain Rourke's hidden collection, the months of brutal renovation work, the discovery that changed everything. She learned to show just enough artifacts to intrigue without overwhelming. A handful of coins in a display case. Navigation instruments with explanatory cards. Pottery fragments arranged to suggest the original vessel they'd been part of. This piece, she'd say, holding up a fragment of blue-glazed pottery, traveled from Spain to the New World in 1655. It was probably on a merchant ship carrying trade goods to colonial settlements. The ship never made it. 300 years later, archaeologists recovered this fragment from the seafloor. And now you're looking at it, touching history through glass, connected to people who lived and died centuries ago. She'd watch visitors' faces transform as they understood. History wasn't abstract dates and facts. It was human stories preserved in fragments. Miguel started giving tours too, in his own way. He'd approach visitors on the dock, introduce himself as the ship's official junior curator, and offer his own version of the story, heavily embellished with pirates and storms and dramatic discoveries. "He's making half of it up," Sophia complained. "He's 8, Rosa replied. "He's allowed to embellish. He told someone we found a treasure chest full of doubloons. Did we correct him before they paid?" "Yes." "Then it's fine." By August, the weekend tours were generating about $400 per month. Not nearly enough to live on, but enough to cover the ship's operating costs and prove the concept could work. Frank Pierce had continued his patient renovation of the ship's systems. The heating now worked consistently. The plumbing had been expanded to include a working shower. The electrical system had been upgraded to handle the increased load from lights, computers, and conservation equipment. "You know what the ship needs?" Frank said one afternoon while installing new portholes in the main hold. "A name change. It has a name. MERIDIAN EXPLORER. I mean a new name that reflects what it's becoming. Something about heritage or history or discovery." Rosa considered this. "What would you suggest?" "I don't know. I'm a welder, not a poet. But you should think about it. Names matter." She brought it up at the next foundation board meeting. Herself, Linda, and Patricia sitting around the mess table with coffee and notes. "Frank thinks we should rename the ship," Rosa said. "Renaming a vessel is traditionally bad luck," Linda pointed out. "Traditionally, buying a sunken ship and turning it into a museum is insane," Patricia countered. "We've already defied tradition pretty thoroughly." They debated options. Meridian Heritage Center. Discovery Museum Ship. Rourke's Legacy. Nothing felt quite right. Finally, Sophia, who'd been doing homework in the corner, spoke up. "What about Meridian Keeper?" They all turned to look at her. "Because Captain Rourke kept the collection safe," Sophia explained. "And Mom's keeping the ship safe. And we're all keeping the history safe. Keepers." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes. "I love it." They voted unanimously. The ship will be rechristened Meridian Keeper. The renaming ceremony happened on a Saturday in September. Linda organized it, inviting marina residents, local press, and historical society members. They gathered on the dock while Rosa stood on the ship's bow with a bottle of champagne. "I'm terrible at speeches," Rosa began. "6 months ago, I bought this ship for $600 at an auction. Everyone said I was crazy. They were probably right." Laughter from the crowd. "But this ship has given my family a home. It's given us purpose. And it's given us the privilege of protecting something that matters. A collection of artifacts that tell stories about exploration, trade, loss, and discovery. Today we rename her Meridian Keeper in honor of everyone who's protected those stories. Captain Rourke, who saved the collection. Linda's father, who helped recover it. Linda herself, who watched over the ship for decades. And everyone here who believes that history is worth preserving, even when it's hard, even when nobody funds it, even when it means living aboard a half-broken research vessel in a marina that smells like diesel and fish." More laughter. Rosa smiled, feeling less nervous now. "We're building something here. A place where people can connect with the past, where kids can learn that history isn't boring where artifacts aren't just objects in museum cases, but bridges to human experiences. We don't know if we'll succeed. We don't know if we can sustain this long term. But we're trying, and that's worth celebrating. She swung the champagne bottle against the bow. It shattered perfectly, foam running down the hull. I christened the Meridian Keeper. May you protect the stories entrusted to you. The crowd applauded. Miguel hooped. Sophia wiped away tears she'd deny later. That evening, after everyone had left and the marina had settled into quiet, Rosa stood on deck watching the sun set over the water. The ship, her ship, their ship, rocked gently at its mooring. Frank joined her at the rail. That was a good speech. I stuttered through half of it, made it sound genuine. He pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. I've been meaning to give you this. It's an accounting of all the work I've done, all the materials I've provided. You've been making payments when you can, but I know you're barely keeping up. Figured you should know where things stand. Rosa took the paper with dread. She'd been trying not to think about her accumulated debts. The number at the bottom made her stomach drop. $8,347. Frank, I can't. You can, he interrupted. I'm not asking for payment now. I'm telling you what the ship owes. When the museum opens, when you start making real money, we'll figure out a payment plan. But Rosa, I need you to understand something. This work I've done, it's worth it. This project matters. Don't let money, fear, kill it. Rosa folded the paper carefully. Why do you believe in this so much? Frank was quiet for a moment. 20 years ago, my daughter drowned. She was 16, went swimming with friends at the beach, got caught in a riptide. By the time we realized she was missing, by the time the Coast Guard found her, it was too late. Rosa's hand went to her mouth. Frank, I'm so sorry. I went dark after that. Stopped caring about much of anything. The marina work kept me busy, but didn't mean anything. Then Linda told me about you, about this crazy single mother trying to save a sinking ship, trying to give her kid something better. And I don't know, maybe I saw my daughter in Sophia. Maybe I wanted to help someone's kid have a future since mine couldn't. Maybe I just needed a project that mattered again. He looked at Rosa directly. You gave me that. This ship, what you're building, it reminds me that good things can still happen. That people can still fight for something meaningful. So don't thank me for helping. Thank you for giving me something worth working on. Rosa hugged him. This weathered man who'd become a surrogate father, who'd made their impossible dream incrementally less impossible. We're going to make this work, she said. Somehow, we're going to make this work. The fall brought new challenges. The State Historical Preservation Office sent an inspector to evaluate the artifact's storage conditions. He was a pinch man named Gerald who found fault with everything. The temperature controls weren't precise enough. The humidity monitoring was insufficient. The security was inadequate. These artifacts should be in a proper facility, he declared. Climate-controlled vault, 24-hour security, professional conservators on staff. We're working toward that, Patricia said patiently. The grant applications are pending. Meanwhile, you have $500,000 worth of archaeological material stored aboard a vessel that could sink, catch fire, or be burglarized. This is irresponsible. Rosa felt her temper rising. This ship isn't going to sink. We've made it watertight. We have fire suppression systems. We have security cameras. Insufficient. I'm recommending the state take custody of the collection until you can demonstrate proper preservation capabilities. You can't do that, Linda said sharply. Rosa owns these artifacts. They were legally acquired when she purchased the ship. Archaeological materials are subject to state oversight when public interest is implicated. The argument escalated. Gerald threatened seizure. Linda threatened lawyers. Patricia tried to mediate while Rosa stood frozen, watching her project unravel. Finally, Gerald left with a warning. They had 60 days to upgrade their storage conditions or face state action to relocate the collection. Can he actually do that? Rosa asked after he'd gone. Patricia's expression was grave. Maybe. There's legal precedent for state intervention when significant archaeological materials are at risk. We need to take this seriously. The upgrades he's demanding would cost $30,000 minimum, Linda said. Climate control systems, vault-grade security, conservation equipment. Where are we supposed to get that money? Rosa felt despair settling over her. They'd come so far, worked so hard, and now a bureaucrat with a clipboard might shut everything down. That night, unable to sleep, Rosa climbed up to the wheelhouse. She stood at the helm, hands on the ship's wheel that hadn't turned in decades, looking out at the dark marina. Sophia appeared beside her. "Can't sleep either? Too much on my mind, Mija. Are we going to lose the collection?" Rosa had tried to shield her children from the stress, but Sophia was too perceptive. "I don't know. Maybe. That's not fair. We found it. We've been taking care of it." "I know, but the state has rules about how archaeological artifacts should be stored. We're not meeting those standards." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if we asked for help? Like public help. Tell people what's happening, ask them to donate. A fundraiser? Everyone does crowdfunding now. We could set up a website, explain the situation, ask people to contribute. If enough people care, maybe we could raise the money." Rosa looked at her 12-year-old daughter. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." They launched the crowdfunding campaign the next day. Patricia helped Rosa write the appeal, explaining the situation honestly. The Meridian Keeper needed $30,000 in the next 60 days to upgrade artifact storage, or the collection would be seized by the state. "We're not asking people to fund our dream," Rosa said in the video they posted. "We're asking for help protecting history. This collection represents 30 years of careful archaeological work. It tells stories about colonial trade, maritime exploration, and human ambition. It deserves to be preserved properly. If you believe history matters, if you think ordinary people should be able to protect extraordinary things, please help us keep the collection where it belongs." They posted the campaign on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, they'd raised $847. By Sunday evening, $2,300. The local news picked up the story, "Single mother fighting to keep archaeological collection." The piece aired Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, they'd raised $8,000. Comments poured in with donations. "My daughter visited your ship last summer. She hasn't stopped talking about becoming an archaeologist. Thank you for inspiring her. I'm a retired history teacher. This is exactly the kind of project that makes the past come alive. Keep fighting. Bureaucrats always try to control everything. Show them that regular people can do important work too." The money climbed steadily. $10,000. $15,000. $20,000. Patricia appeared at the ship one afternoon with extraordinary news. "The Maritime Archaeology Society saw your crowdfunding campaign. They're offering a matching grant. For every dollar you raise, they'll match it up to $15,000. Rosa, if you hit your $30,000 goal, they'll give you another $15,000. You'd have $45,000 total." Rosa felt lightheaded. Why would they do that? Because your story is inspiring people. Because you're making archaeology accessible in a way major institutions don't. Because they want to support innovative preservation projects. The matching grant announcement pushed the campaign into overdrive. By day 55 of their 60-day deadline, they'd raised $31,247. With the Maritime Archaeology Society's match, they had over $46,000. Rosa called Gerald, the state inspector, with barely contained triumph. "We're upgrading our storage facilities. I'm sending you the specifications today. Professional climate control, vault-grade security, everything you demanded. The work starts next week." There was a long pause. Then Gerald said, grudgingly, "That's acceptable. I'll schedule a follow-up inspection when the upgrades are complete." The installation took 3 weeks. A crew transformed the main hold into a proper museum vault. Industrial climate control units maintained precise temperature and humidity. Security cameras covered every angle. Motion sensors, fire suppression systems, UV-filtered lighting. The space looked like something from a major institution, not a converted research vessel. Gerald's follow-up inspection found nothing to criticize. He signed off on their storage conditions without comment and left looking vaguely disappointed. "Some people just hate seeing others succeed," Linda observed. With the storage crisis resolved, Rosa turned attention back to the museum itself. They used the excess funds from the crowdfunding campaign to begin converting the upper deck into exhibition space. The wheelhouse became an interpretive area about the ship's research history. The captain's quarters became an office and small research library. The main hold was divided into sections. One area displayed artifact from the Site Omega collection, coins, pottery, navigation instruments, each with detailed explanatory text. Another section told the story of Captain Rourke's decision to hide the collection, including pages from his journal blown up and mounted on walls. A third area focused on the archaeological process itself, showing how artifacts were recovered, preserved, and studied. Patricia designed everything with an educator's eye. Interactive displays for kids. QR codes linking to additional information. Touchscreen monitors showing 3D models of artifacts. The museum was small, but thoughtfully curated. They opened officially on March 15th, exactly 1 year after Rosa had found the hidden collection. The opening ceremony drew over 200 people. Local dignitaries gave speeches about cultural preservation and community initiative. Patricia presented Rosa with a framed certificate declaring the Meridian Keeper an accredited educational institution. But the moment Rosa treasured most came when an elderly man approached her after the ceremony. He was probably 80, thin and weathered, using a cane for support. "Miss Delgado," he said, "I'm James Rourke, Jr. Captain Rourke was my father." Rosa's breath caught. "Your father?" "I've been trying to find his family for months. Nobody seemed to know where he'd gone after the university shut down the program. He moved to Oregon, worked on fishing boats until he retired. Died 5 years ago." James looked around the museum with tears in his eyes. He never stopped talking about that collection, about how he'd saved it, hidden it, hoped someone would eventually discover it and understand its value. "I thought he was obsessed, maybe a little crazy. Now I see he was right." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. He left this with his papers. Said if anyone ever found the collection, to give them this. Rosa opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter dated 2019, written in shaky handwriting. "To whoever finds my collection, I have spent 30 years wondering if I did the right thing. The university called it theft. My colleagues called it obsession. My family called it foolishness. But I believe then, and I believe now, that these artifacts deserve to be protected, preserved, understood as a complete story rather than scattered pieces. If you're reading this, you found them. You saw value where others saw worthless objects. You cared enough to protect them. That makes you the right person, regardless of who you are or what credentials you hold. Don't let institutions or experts or bureaucrats tell you that you're not qualified to be a guardian of history. The best guardians are people who care, who fight, who refuse to let important things be forgotten. Take care of my collection. Share it with people who need to see that the past matters. And know that somewhere, an old man who worried he'd made a terrible mistake is grateful that his obsession found purpose in your hands. Captain James Rourke. Rosa read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Across the room, Sophia and Miguel were showing visitors around, explaining artifacts with enthusiasm and surprising knowledge. Linda was talking to reporters. Patricia was giving an impromptu lecture on Spanish colonial trade routes. And Rosa held a letter from a dead man, telling her she was doing the right thing. The museum's first year exceeded every expectation. Over 15,000 visitors walked through the Meridian Keeper's exhibits. School groups came from across the region. The story attracted national attention. Articles in archaeology magazines, features in travel publications, a segment on a major news network about unusual museums. Revenue from admissions, gift shop sales, and educational programs totaled $78,000 in that first year. After expenses, Rosa was able to pay herself a modest salary, $40,000. It wasn't wealth, but it was stable income doing work that mattered. She paid off Frank's $8,347 bill in full. Paid off the accumulated debts to Keiko and Marcus and the others who'd helped make the ship habitable. Established a proper operating budget for the museum. Sophia, now 13, had decided she wanted to study archaeology in college. She worked at the museum on weekends, giving tours and helping with collections management. Patricia said she had natural talent, the kind of careful attention to detail that made great researchers. Miguel, 9 now, had become the museum's unofficial greeter. He'd station himself on the dock and engage every potential visitor with his enthusiasm. "You have to see the ship. We have real treasure. My mom found it in a secret room." His version of the story got more elaborate with each telling, but Rosa let him embellish. He was learning to love history, to see it as exciting and relevant. That mattered more than strict accuracy. On a Sunday evening in late spring, Rosa stood on the deck of the MERIDIAN Keeper watching the sun set. The ship rocked gently, secure at its mooring. Through the portholes below, she could see Sophia reading in her cabin, Miguel building something with Legos in his. Linda climbed aboard with 2 beers. She handed one to Rosa, and they stood together at the rail. "You did it," Linda said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Rosa corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "But you started it. You were the one crazy enough to bid on a sinking ship." Rosa smiled. "Everyone said I was throwing money away. You were throwing $600 at an impossible dream, and you caught something extraordinary." They drank their beers in comfortable silence. The marina was quiet except for the gentle sound of water against hulls and the distant cry of seagulls. "What's next?" Linda asked. "What do you mean?" "You've stabilized the museum, established it as a real institution. What's your next goal?" Rosa thought about this. The museum was successful, but there was always more to do. Expand the exhibits, develop new programs, build an endowment for long-term sustainability. "I want to find Site Omega," Rosa said suddenly. Linda turned to look at her. "The original wreck site? Captain Rourke's journal has coordinates. The location where all these artifacts came from. Nobody surveyed it since the 1980s. Modern technology could reveal so much more. Maybe there's more of the wreck preserved. Maybe there are more artifacts. Maybe we could conduct a new archaeological survey and continue the work that got interrupted 36 years ago. That would require permits, funding, equipment, expertise." "I know, but Patricia knows people. The Maritime Archaeology Society already supports us, and we've proven we can handle significant archaeological material responsibly." Linda grinned. "You're not content with success, are you? You always need the next impossible project. I bought a sinking ship for $600 and turned it into a museum. Why stop now?" They laughed together. 2 women who'd built something extraordinary from rust and neglect and desperate determination. Inside the ship, the artifacts that had waited 36 years to be discovered sat in climate-controlled cases, finally serving their purpose. Coins that had traveled from Peru to oblivion. Pottery that had carried food across oceans. Navigation instruments that had guided ships through unknown waters. Each piece told a story about human ambition, about exploration and trade, about dreams carried across vast distances. And now, thanks to a single mother who'd been brave enough to take an impossible risk, those stories were being told again. The MERIDIAN Keeper rocked gently at its mooring, no longer sinking, no longer forgotten. A research vessel that had explored oceans now helped people explore history. A ship that had been abandoned now sheltered dreams. And Rosa Delgado, who'd bought it for $600 when everyone said she was wasting her money, had discovered that sometimes the best investments aren't measured in dollars, but in purpose, in meaning, in the courage to see value where others see waste. She'd been mocked for buying a sunken ship. Now that ship was protecting $495,000 worth of artifacts and generating revenue that supported her family and served thousands of visitors annually. She'd taken the biggest risk of her life, and it had paid dividends beyond anything she could have imagined. As the sun set over the marina, painting the sky in colors that would have stunned the Spanish sailors who'd carried those coins across oceans centuries ago, Rosa raised her beer in a silent toast. To Captain Rourke, who'd saved the collection. To Linda's father, who'd helped recover it. To Linda herself, who'd protected the ship. To Frank and Patricia and all the others who believed. To Sophia and Miguel, who deserved every good thing this life brought them. And to the MERIDIAN Keeper itself, a vessel that had carried researchers, carried artifacts, carried secrets, and now carried hope. Some treasures are found in the earth. Others are built from determination and dreams, and the refusal to accept that ordinary people can't do extraordinary things. Rosa Delgado had found both kinds, and she was just getting started. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.